My A7 IV arrived today, literally minutes before our family outing to the zoo. So I did what any normal gambling man would do. I risked annoying the whole family by bringing along my new camera. I chucked on my Sony 28mm f2 lens, which is quite light and good to travel with. Now, a phone would probably be the best choice for this kind of thing, but I couldn't resist a quick video test to see how it performs right out of the box. Of course, there's nothing special about these shots. I just wanted to see what the camera was like using PP off and standard colors. That's right, guys. I'm going to go full dad mode on this one. Now, before we continue with the rest of the video, I would like to point out quickly that I did change some things because the camera is nearly good to go, but I can't live without changing just a few things, which I was able to do quickly before we got there. Okay, so if we're gonna go full dad mode with this camera, then I do have to change a couple of things, and most importantly, they relate to filming in standard mode, and I'll explain what that is in a sec. But first, we jump over to film mode, because I'll cover photography in another video actually, if that's okay. And then we set it to either manual or aperture mode, if you prefer aperture mode. And why do we choose these modes? Well, you probably want to show off your sexy full frame glass if you bought this camera. So you want to have control over your aperture mainly. I'm going to leave mine in manual. And then I like to leave it in standard and standard colors because they are the most accurate. Oh, and by standard, that also includes things like Cine 2 and S-Cinetone, etc. Okay, so how do we shoot in standard as best as possible? So first of all, put my zebras on 100+, and that helps me decide if the shot is obviously blown out or it's just a light source like this one. Or I'm happy to blow out some of the frame like this wedding shot. And secondly, the second part of shooting in standard is I put my ISO on auto, okay, but bear with me, but then I watch my ISO number like a hawk. And you want that ISO number to be obviously as low as possible. So zebras and ISO as low as possible. And you can have it right at the base if you can, but if it starts flashing like this, then that means the camera can't go low enough with the settings that you've chosen, and the shot will be overexposed. And then the last thing I do to go full dad mode is with these two things, is then I ride the shutter speed and aperture if needed. And that's how I control my exposure. And you can geek out and get an ND filter if you want to control your exposure that way, but you'll be even more annoying to your family. And that's it. That's the key to filming in standard and Cine 2 and Cine 4 and S-Cinetone and things like that. We basically protect the highlights, but we also reduce like noise or anything like that by having the ISO number as low as possible. And like I said, maybe not right on the bottom at the base, because then there's no wiggle room if it starts flashing. And that's it. Simples. Now, you don't need to use zebras, of course. I'll just let some of these shots roll now. You can just eyeball it, but I like to use these meters, these tools, unless I have an amazing monitor or viewfinder. And the viewfinder on the A7 IV is okay. It's marginally better than the A7 III, which I was using before. But the viewfinder on the A7S III is great, and arguably you could eyeball it, but I still switch between that and using zebras. And quickly going back to some other important things I changed before I set out, I put the auto temperature shutdown feature to high, because otherwise it will shut off fairly quickly. That's probably the most important thing to change. And then I set up my two filming modes. I have a normal 4K 25p for me in one mode, so that's 24p for some of you. And then a second mode is like a 4K HS. I chose 50p, and that way that could be my setting for doing slow-mo in 4K. You're probably aware that this camera crops in 1.5 times if you've seen a million videos out there. And it does if you shoot in slow-mo in 4K. And so that's why I chose to film or set up at least two settings and just jump between those two throughout the day, go back and forth. You don't have to do it this way, of course. If you want full frame slow-mo, you can always do that in normal HD, that's fine. And you can even make some kind of shortcut for that in the S&Q mode. Like you can just do a slow-mo quickly. of something running and then jump back. And if you are going to do slow-mo in HD, I've made a video on this before, but my tip is to get as close as you can to your subject, and then the resolution won't matter as much. But if you're trying to do like a big vista in slow-mo in 4K, then I think people will notice. Well, they'll start to notice more frequently. Okay, so I've decided I won't be doing slow-mo or crops or anything if I can help it in this in 4K in this camera. This will be my new A7 III, and how I was using my A7 III was I was always putting a prime lens on that, and that'd sit on a monopod for shots like this. And I let the A7S III do all the gimbal work, you know, all the heavy lifting of 4K and 4K 50, 60 and slow-mo and all those kind of things. And oh, actually, just quickly, I also made sure active stave was on. And then if active stave is on, of course your 28mm becomes like 30. Okay, so why the A7 IV? Well, I shoot weddings for a living mainly, and I wanted a good B cam for my videography to match the A7S III. And also, I'm getting a lot more photo work these days, so I do need a good stills camera in the same ecosystem. To be honest though, my A7 III is still amazing, but the thing that tipped it for me was the active stave in the A7 IV. And sure, there are supposed to be some color improvements, but that's beyond the scope of this video, and I'll cover that in later ones. I'll compare the A7S III, A7 IV, and A7 III. So back to the A7 IV. Yep, it's a great hybrid photo video solution. But in today's video, we'll just look at how it performed with the 28mm lens on. So every shot here is either full frame 28mm or cropped to about 42, I think, millimeter equivalent. And that's pretty much it for this video. I'm trying to make it short. I like to make these practical use vids because if I don't think anyone else will. Everyone seems to be making S-Log vids and shutter speed 180 rule vids, but sometimes you just want some practical use scenarios. Anyway, I will say, I probably won't use S-Log 3 on this camera, to be honest, especially if it's cropped, but that's just me. Anyway, look out for some Look out for some tests next time. I'll compare my cams side by side because I still have two lenses that are exactly the same that I use for weddings. So we can do some side by side comparisons. I'll even do S-Log for you if you like. Anyway, see you next time. Bye.